Welcome to the Awaken Ireland Show on TNS Radio.
You're very welcome to Awaken Ireland Radio. This is show 9 and we have an action-packed show for you again. This week is just me behind the mic for the night. There's been so much going on over the last week. My head is spinning, to be honest with you, and you've all heard the story about Claire O'Sullivan, and you're aware of her situation, and we all know Claire very well down here in Waterford, and Claire has been having great difficulty in exercising her rights as a mother in relation to the Constitution of Ireland, and it's all of her rights are basically being ignored by the judiciary in the state. And it's very worrying indeed, because it affects everybody, not just Claire, but her child and everybody else who has children and who cares about their kids and wants their children to have a future and to be protected against unlawful vaccination. That's really the only way that you can describe it, because as many people are aware that it is unlawful to force somebody to have their child inoculated against their will. And as we know, that Claire is the primary caregiver for her child, and all Claire wants is for her child to be protected, and any mother that would be in the same situation as Claire would be horrified to think that if they had evidence that inoculation is harmful to their child, and if they were forced by somebody outside of themselves to have their child vaccinated, that it would be the worst possible crime against their family. And it's very, very worrying indeed. So we have, I know that it's been probably already been broadcast on different shows, but I'm going to read out a transcript from the court, and I'm also going to read out the open letter to the press that Claire has put out there on the internet. And it's again quite scary that this has come about, and I'm just going to start from the start of it and work our way through it. We've also got Paul Byrne from Awaken Wicklow talking about LENR technology, and we also have another recording as well that will be going out after that. Robin Wilson, who was part of the Occupy movement, Dame Street, and his history behind being an activist, the reasons why he joined Occupy Dame Street, and the fact that he ran for government as an independent, and what he's doing now, and how he sees the future of Ireland, and how he believes that things can change. So we're going to start, like I said, with the open letter to the press from Claire O'Sullivan, and I'm just going to read it from the top here. So, my name is Claire O'Sullivan from Waterford in Ireland, and I'd like to make a statement. I have a 5-year-old son. I am currently hiding away with my son to protect him from the authorities, HSC, Gardaí, courts, etc., because of the illegal, unlawful, uncaring and heavy-handed way I have been dealt with by the authorities, which has all stemmed from me not consenting to the school-age vaccinations, MMR, measles, mumps and rubella, and tetra vaccination 4 and 1, polio, and diphtheria, and pertussis and tetanus. I do have genuine concerns about these vaccinations following my own research and listening to the views of many others, including medical professionals, who have shared some of these concerns with me, for example, about the possible links with autism, for which there is now credible evidence on the long-term effects on children's immune systems. A good place for most people to start would be to ask the HSC or GP for the insert leaflet that comes with the box that the vaccination is contained with, and taking the simple step of looking at the ingredients and what the medical officials call side effects, which are quite simply possible serious effects. This is just one place to start with research. These vaccinations are not mandatory in the Republic of Ireland. All parents are given a consent form to sign in the consent or I do not consent section. I chose not to consent. I feel that I am acting in the best interest of my child, and my decision is to protect him. I have every right to make this decision as the primary carer, natural mother, sole custodian and legal guardian of my son. However, my son's father, who is not a custodian but a legal guardian, who is an ex-partner, has consented to both vaccinations and has pushed for them to be administered. His motives for which I believe are more for argument's sake with me and not for the best interests protection of our son, which many will believe. This may become clearer as I explain further what has happened so far. So when the vaccinations were due to be carried out, first of all, there was some communication between myself, HSC and my son's father, re me not consenting to the vaccinations. There were minimal communication between his father and I, the father's choice, as he was not willing to discuss the matter in full with me with an open mind, willing to consider all aspects surrounding the vaccinations. Example, documents released, evidence, studies from other parties outside of the HSC, vaccine ingredients, etc. He was insisting to go ahead with it because it was what he felt was best, and because the HSC and my son's GP had recommended for the vaccines to be administered. He felt he didn't have to look into it further. So consider this scenario. If someone handed you a drink and said, give this to your child to drink, would you 1. Give it without question, or would you want to know more about what it contains for your child's safety and make a decision either 2, not to give it at all because of lack of knowledge and trust, or 3, decide to investigate the ingredients further with an open mind? I at the time was torn between 2 and 3 because of some conflicting information I had come across, and I still am. However, I also believe wholeheartedly in the most natural approach possible to healthcare, which immediately people will recognize this as a problem for authorities, for reasons we cannot go into further if I am asked at a later stage once my son's case has been dealt with. So I insisted that I did not consent, and my son's father insisted that he did consent. And I feel it is most unfortunate that he was unwilling to further his own research on the issue. Keep in mind that this is not mandatory, despite my attempts to press him to do so. Some weeks later I had received contact from my son's father asking me was I going to go ahead with the vaccinations or not. I reminded him that I did not consent and that the authorities had this on file. He replied that I had left him with no choice. When I asked what he meant by this, he did not reply. The next contact I received about the issue was, to my horror, a summons to the district court. I had adjourned the first date, and there was a new date set for the 23rd of May. When I attended on that date, we both represented ourselves, I was refused the company of a Mackenzie friend in the court. This is a basic right. Everyone is entitled to be accompanied by a Mackenzie friend, but I was denied this. I asked the judge to allow the issue to be dealt with outside of court and for the father to co-parent, as this should be a family decision and it is wrong for the courts to be involved in it. The father argued that he had been willing to discuss, but I insisted to the judge that he hadn't and that he was lying. So I requested that the judge allow us time to discuss the issue in private. The judge granted this, but we had to return to inform him what had been discussed. Outside of the courtroom, but still on site, I had asked the father to discuss the matter with me on mutual grounds and tried to persuade him that it be best if we set a date and time, or we could even leave the courts and deal with it ourselves that same day in private, to which he would not agree. He insisted that the matter was that he wanted the vaccinations and I didn't, so it was to be heard in court that we didn't need to discuss it further. I appealed to him that I had major concerns re ingredients of the vaccinations and that I didn't, so it was to be heard in court that we didn't need to discuss it further. I appealed to him that I had major concerns re ingredients of the vaccines, and I had spoken to the GP, Dr. Cormac O'Neill, and he could not answer some of my questions. I asked him, did this not concern him, and what questions had he asked? But he replied that he didn't care and that he was happy with the fact that the HSC were recommending it, and that was all he needed to know. He insisted that we go back into the courtroom to have it heard. To cut a long story short, with how it was dealt with on this particular occasion, Judge David Kennedy refused to allow me have the right to hold my decision as a natural mother, guardian, custodian of my son, and took the position to make a decision on my son's behalf against my will. He proceeded to sign the order. I insisted that he sign a disclaimer to at least accept responsibility for his actions to sign the order against my will. He refused to look at my disclaimer. He even laughed at me, and the father laughed at me. He signed it despite me still questioning him on his decision, and said it's signed now, so you can appeal it with the circuit court. And these are the games that they play, people. I appealed the case with the circuit court. I served a notice of appeal on the father. The court's office informed me there was no further date for hearing in the circuit court until the autumn, more like November. I was told I would be given sufficient notice, but that the order still stands even though a notice of appeal has been filed. So moving forward, on the 7th of June, I had received a letter in the post to notify me to be in court the very next day. On the 8th of June, I was unprepared to no representation. I had no arrangements made for childcare, work, other issues. So I had asked a solicitor to ask for an adjournment due to the severe short notice of less than 24 hours. If I had been away, I would have missed the date, been marked as a no-show, and my appeal would not have been heard. Judge Faherty on this day granted the appeal to be adjourned to the 14th of June the following week. I had time to get legal representation then because of this. On the 14th of June, my solicitor and barrister presented the case to Judge Alice Doyle at the Circuit Court in Clonmel. Extensive paperwork from the barrister was discussed between the judge and the barrister on legal acts and statutes and the Constitution to prove the courts had no jurisdiction to interfere in this case. The judge expressed that she felt constrained by the law to act in what she felt was the best interest of the child, and decided to rise on it and look at the paperwork the barrister had provided. What I understood from what she said was that she was taking a personal stance on the matter and not acting impartially for both parties, which is what a judge is supposed to do. She even asked me did I know someone with polio, because she did, and it's a horrible disease. I did not know at the time, but since then I have become aware of a gentleman who is wheelchair bound from the age of 7 following his polio vaccination. And I do believe I know who she's talking about, a gentleman that spoke in Stillorgan Park Hotel who is wheelchair bound. But however, on this day the legal issue and constitution was what the barrister wanted to address, and we felt that the judge would have allowed another hearing for another date, a full day, to address the issues surrounding the vaccinations. The judge, however, made what appeared to be a personal judgment to affirm the order from the district court, and even advised the father to get legal aid, as he may need to be more prepared if he were to seek further remedy via judicial review. On this day I was under duress to decide and make judge and father aware of my plans to either pursue judicial review or not to sue the father. So due to lack of options at the time, and the fact that the legal team had told me that it could cost me tens of thousands to pursue, I was forced to say that I was unable to pursue solely due to financial difficulty. Now over the weekend, 16th and 17th of June, I was made aware that I do have further option to represent myself and present papers for grounds of judicial review. Relief sought and compiled an affidavit to accompany this to tell my side of the story of the unjust decisions that took place in both districts and in Circuit Court. I decided to go ahead with this as my son's safety is paramount to me, and I felt that I would regret it if I hadn't tried to protect him further. So on Monday 18th I presented myself to the High Court and made an application to which I was refused, and the legal acts statutes plus Article 41.1.1 from the Constitution was ignored and I was turned away. I was expected to be back in Waterford from Dublin within 10 minutes to carry out the order to vaccinate my son. I was completely distraught and shocked by the decision and wanted to still pursue it further and continue to receive legal lawful advice on the matter. The courts were acting illegally and, more importantly, unlawfully, going by all of the advice that I had been given. My belief as a mother to the right to protect my child, and I believe that the courts were violating the Constitution, which was a huge issue, and I didn't understand why, and I still don't. I returned to Waterford to be with my son and decided it was best to take us both away from the situation and spend some time together while I was deciding how best to press the matter further. To my disbelief, I had been told that the Gardaí had instantly begun harassing my family and friends as to where my location is with Thomas, even though I had passed message on that I was overwhelmed and was just taking a few days away with my son while I was thinking of what to do further on with the courts. I did not want to give up my fight to my right and my son's right for me as his natural mother to protect him. The police have also gained entry to my house illegally, unlawfully, and not only that, but they have allowed family Other associates and my ex-partner entered the house while doing so. They did not have permission to enter my home. I believed they used my family's vulnerable emotional nature to suit themselves to gain entry to my home. Do they not realize that this behavior has worried me even more for my son's safety, and our rights are being violated? Everyone involved is terrified. So the position that I am in now is that I am in even more fear than before for safety of everyone involved, and my family and friends are under constant harassment. This should not be happening. Nobody should be put in this position of fear and have their rights violated. I want the public to know my side of the story and the extent of the situation. We need to support each other to ensure our families are safe, and hopefully I will get justice. Signed, Claire O'Sullivan, 22nd of June 2012. And Claire, all of our thoughts are with you at this moment in time, and with Thomas and your family and your friends and everyone that cares about you, and we all care about you, Claire. Our thoughts are with you, and we support you, and we understand the difference between what is lawful and what is legal. We understand the difference between the people and the state, and more people are starting to wake up and understand the difference between the sovereignty of the people and the corporatocracy that is the state, which is actually the provisional government of Ireland, which has never been a full government of Ireland. They've never had that authority. So the question is, what do you do? What do you do in this situation? Now, Claire, if you're listening, we'd love for you to ring in live in the show. If you could possibly give us a call. You have my Skype address, Claire, and we'd love to hear from you. So just to give you an opportunity, Claire, to call the show if you're listening into the show, we're just going to play out another song to give you an opportunity, and we're going to read out the transcript then from the courts that we have here, and the dialogue that was passed back and forth between Claire and the judge sitting in the High Court in Dublin at the time. So we're going to go to another quick song, and Claire, if you are listening, please give us a call. That was Cream. I hope you enjoyed that, and we haven't heard from Claire, so we're just going to go straight into the transcript here. This was the transcript High Court application for judicial review on the 18th of June 2012 in Court 12 in Dublin. And the judge that was sitting was Judge Birmingham, and Claire O'Sullivan was the defendant. So we start with JB, which is Judge Birmingham. I understand there is a proposal that your son will be vaccinated, and his father and yourself take different views as to the merits of vaccination. Claire replied, yes. Judge says, and it appears that there was an application to the district court on that aspect. Is that right? Claire Sullivan said, that's right. Judge, brought by your son's father, and the district court concluded that vaccination was in the child's best interest, and you appealed that to the circuit court. Is that right? That's true, says Claire. And the circuit court took the same position as the district court, that the child's best interest was served by vaccination, says the judge. Claire replied, well, I felt that the judge appeared on a personal basis, that it wasn't an impartial decision, and that there was documentation on the Section 11 of the Guardianship of Infants Act and the Health Act of 1947, and that, in my opinion, and the people representing me on the day, the judge bypassed that and went with a personal decision. Pause while judge reads papers. Judge says, what vaccination are we talking about? Claire said, 4-in-1 school vaccination and MMR. Judge says, and what age is your son now? He's 5. Judge replies, what it seems to me is that effectively you are in a position of saying that you don't like the conclusion reached by the judge in the circuit court, and you want to come to the High Court on the basis that I or some other High Court judge might give a different decision, that I'm afraid can't provide a basis for seeking judicial review. So unless you can point to some material to indicate that the matter wasn't fairly or properly addressed, I don't see that it is a case for judicial review. And Claire replies, well, in this instance, I'd say that arguable grounds clearly exist on the matter. Judge says, what are they? I don't see them there. Claire replied. Based on cases of G versus DPP, O'Reilly versus Cassidy and Gordon versus DPP, which say that the threshold is of arguable grounds. Judge replies, there's no question about that, but that doesn't mean that you don't have to establish arguable grounds, and as that means that if you're going to suggest that the matter wasn't approached in a judicial way or a fair way, you have to put some material before the court to establish that. It doesn't seem to me that you've done that. Claire said, the time frame was very limited. The order was given for today at 3 o'clock. Judge replied, but I don't see that the time frame is either here or there, because it's a question of making a complaint that there was some unfairness of the procedure and something could have been done within hours of the hearing in the circuit court. You've put together a very well composed statement of grounds and affidavit, Claire says, reaches to bag for constitution. The judge replies, but I don't see that there's any way that the judge's decision in the circuit court is a case for judicial review, so I'm afraid I'm going to have to refuse your application. Claire replied, well, I want to refer to the Constitution, Article 41.1. The state recognises the family as a natural, primary and fundamental unit group of society and as a moral institution possessing inalienable and indescriptible rights. Judge replies, but in the situation, as I understand it, is that the child's parents are in disagreement as to what is in the child's best interests. And Claire jumps in, but I'm the primary carer for my child. Judge replied, and in those circumstances the matter was brought before the district court, where the question was litigated and a view was reached, and then there was an appeal from that to the circuit court, where the matter was relitigated, and I don't believe that it would be appropriate to reach a judicial review, so I'm afraid I'm going to have to review your application. Claire replies, there's no legal obligation for the child to be vaccinated. There's consent forms. Judge replies, yes, but this is a matter where I understand the child's father is saying he wants a vaccination, where the matter has been litigated. No, I'm sorry, I can't grant a judicial review. Thank you. So, I mean, I leave that up to yourselves. You can make up your own mind on that. But, I mean, for me, it's pretty much glaringly obvious that the courts are completely ignoring the sovereignty of the mother, 100%. You know, it's shocking to say the least. The father absolutely has rights. He does. I'm a father myself. I'm a single father myself. I've been through the court system myself. But when it comes to something that's consensual, and that is not part even of their system of where legality is part of the law system, as in the world that they live in, there as Sovereign Slim Shady likes to call it, the Wonderland. You know, in that case, you know, I have to say that if it's consensual, well then the court should not be stepping in and making decisions on behalf of the mother. I mean, I think that's pretty obvious, really. It really is quite shocking that they believe that they have the power to do that, and the fact that the judge glossed over the Constitution as well is very, very condescending towards the people of Ireland, condescending towards Claire. Yeah, condescending towards Claire, condescending towards the rights that she has, the inalienable rights, that the indescriptible rights that is part of the construction of the Constitution, the foundation of the Constitution that's there for all of us. I mean, that document wasn't written up so that it could be used as toilet paper. You know, it was written up because that the people that wrote that Constitution believed that we're all equal, and that sovereignty is as far as I'm aware, it's mentioned 3 times in the preamble of the Constitution. Okay, and that unfortunately that these courts are not Irish sovereign courts; they are crown courts, and this is the reasons why that you're not getting heard, and they don't want to come out and say it directly, because then the game is up. They can't come out and say, Claire O'Sullivan, by the way, we don't recognise your Constitution because we're not part of your society. You know, our allegiance is with the crown. So they're not going to come out and say that, right? So they have to dance around the issue with using words they believe will give them the authority, or completely ignore the rights and use flary language or just to deflect and direct away from the issue at hand. And you can see what the judge was saying there. Yes, she was actually agreeing. The judge didn't actually agree. She said, yes, but this is a matter where I understand. So she's actually agreeing what Claire is saying. But let's just have a look at that again, right? Let's go back over the last couple of lines. Claire says there's no legal obligation for the child to be vaccinated. There's consent forms, right? Just spelling it out for the judge. And the first word the judge says is yes, which is an agreement. But this is a matter where I understand the child's father. So she's just basically saying, I understand what you're saying, but I don't really give a crap because you're in my court, and what I say goes because I'm the king in this court, and who are you to say otherwise? You're in my court, and my rules go, and if you don't like it, well, I don't really care. And that's pretty much what the conversation that went back and forth was really saying. And it's sad, but it is good. It is good. It is good to outline that. It is good to outline that you can see it for what it is. I'm glad I got an opportunity to read this transcript out, because it's been spelt out for you. It really has been spelt out that even when they're agreeing with a sovereign woman in the court who is terrified that her child is going to be vaccinated against her will, that they're agreeing, but yet at the same time they're going, I agree, but what are you going to do about it? We're going to make a decision anyway. And then if you leave the court, and if you don't follow the order of the courts, what's going to happen is then we're going to set members of the Garda Síochána out there to pick you up and to pull you back into court again because you didn't agree. So people, this is what we're at now. This is where we're at. I don't blame the Gardaí, right? I don't particularly blame all of the judges. I don't particularly blame the barristers or the solicitors. The system itself is the problem. They're all tied into it. They're all dysfunctional within the system. And that the only solution for this is to get as much awareness out there as possible that the system that we have is not the Irish people's system of governance. It's not the Irish people's version of law. And that until the time comes where people actually realise that this is the realisation that nothing is really going to change. Nothing can change. Okay? So thanks for listening in for that particular dialogue, because there was a lot in that between Claire's letter and the transcripts, and we're going to continue on with the show now, and we wish Claire all the best and Thomas all the best, and everyone's looking out for her and cares about her, and she's in our thoughts all the time. So we're going to go to another quick song, and then we're going to play out an interview with Paul Byrne. Back in with Awaken Ireland. You're very welcome back to the show. If you want to contact Awaken Ireland, you can always email us at awakenirelandradio@gmail.com. We also have set up a new Facebook page. It's facebook.com/Awaken Ireland Radio. You can send us a message there if you wish to appear on the show for an interview, or if you have anybody in mind that you'd like to be interviewed for our show. You're more than welcome to send us an email to awakenirelandradio@gmail.com, or you can also contact us through Facebook on facebook.com/Awaken Ireland Radio. Next up we have Paul Byrne talking about LENR technology. And on Skype we have Paul Byrne. Paul, you're very welcome back to the show.
How you doing, James?
I'm not too bad. Yourself?
Oh, good, thanks, yeah.
Good. Paul, we're going to ask you a few questions about a technology that you've been looking at now for quite a while, that you're very hopeful this technology can be used as an alternative to the current fossil fuel burning that powers our power stations here in Ireland, and something that you can implement in every town in the country. Can you tell us a little bit about LENR technology, how you came across it, how you think it's going to be viable for the future, and how you can work it into the current Awaken Ireland ideology?
Yeah, okay. Well, I came across this last January sort of time, and I was just looking around on the internet, various websites, and came across this, what you could only call it a breakthrough energy source, really, I suppose. And the story where I took it up was with an Italian guy called Rossi.
Yeah.
And he is in Bologna. He was at the time, and he was claiming to have a new technology, which is a type of nuclear technology, but kind of desktop sized, and which takes place or operates at room temperature.
Okay.
And if what it was, the term used was cold fusion, and the term cold fusion comes from 1989 when there was two guys called Pons and Fleischmann at MIT who claimed to have recreated or created a nuclear fusion reaction at room temperature, basically in a glass jar.
Okay, wow.
And this is one of the most remarkable scientific claims ever, because nuclear fusion is what takes place in stars, and when you have nuclear fusion, it's when two atoms fuse together, and by doing so they release an enormous amount of energy. When fusion takes place in the center of stars, it's usually at around 500 million degrees, and there's a huge pressure because of the gravity of each star. Those conditions create it and contain it and allow it. The stars are kind of, you could call them isolated in a vacuum of space. To have a fusion reaction in an environment where we walk around, is impossible to the scientific establishment. And they're right.
Or so they thought.
It is.
It is impossible.
Sorry?
It is impossible.
Well, in the way that it takes place in stars, it's impossible.
Right.
I mean, they're trying to. There's a huge project costing billions and billions every year, which is a joint thing between Japan and France and a few more countries, called ITER, ITER, and it's to try and create that type of fusion, and they're getting nowhere really. To be honest, they're trying to contain the location of the reaction they're trying to create in magnetic fields. It takes a lot of energy, and I don't think they'll ever do it.
Okay.
So that's regular fusion. So when these boys came out and said, well, we've happened upon a fusion reaction in a glass jar, room temperature, everyone was very skeptical, and people rushed out, of course, to try and recreate it, but they couldn't. So Pons and Fleischmann got rubbished, and now they didn't call it cold fusion. It was actually a guy who popped up later on in the 9/11 type of category of information, called Steve Jones from Brigham Young University in Utah. He coined the phrase cold fusion. And long story short, anyway, they were rubbished. But the scientific establishment went, we couldn't recreate it, so the effect isn't real. So in the intervening years, anyway, a lot of people have continued on and persevered with the quest for cold fusion.
Yeah. And
quite literally, there has been a lot of success. MIT was the institution who was most vocal in rubbishing Pons and Fleischmann.
Right.
And MIT are now running a course in cold fusion. And just today I was watching videos by a guy called Hagelstein, where he goes through the facts of the results that MIT have had and other people have had.
Yeah.
And they can reach this effect now. And it looks like it's a matter of engineering and time to get this technology commercially available. Now, so back to Andrea Rossi. So there's a lot of groups and bodies and people working on cold fusion, trying to get a working technology. Now this Italian guy popped up kind of out of nowhere and says that he has a working technology, and he's calling it the energy catalyzer. And he's come in for a lot of skepticism, a lot of queries, and he is treading a thin line between is it a scam or is it not a scam, which I think, and a lot of people who are watching the story think he's treading very well. He's a peculiar kind of a character. He's not a mainstream scientist. He's an inventor.
Right.
And so his approach to it is he's getting inundated with requests for this test and that test, and public tests and private tests, and industry tests and everything. But he is maintaining his course, which is to get to market, and he keeps saying, I'll let the market decide. I'll come out with a product, and if it works and people buy it and they're happy with it, then there's your proof, and he's backed up in that approach, I would say, because this technology isn't radioactive. There's no dangerous materials, no radioactive materials, and no emissions of any description. So,
which has been proven by many clinical trials. Wouldn't that be true to say that? There's a lot of scientific studies, trials, and
there's been he has done tests, like, and people have gone to visit with him and look at his device, and they've come back saying, look, it seems to work as far as we can see. We didn't get to test it as rigorously as we would like to, but it looks like it's working. And they're testing for gamma radiation and stuff, and there's very little to none. So he's progressing on. Where was I going to go with this? He has a website and a blog, and he answers questions quite promptly, and he keeps communication going, but he's keeping his cards close to his chest, because, as you can imagine, with the technology he has, apparently, if it's real, it's a silver bullet against the very big beast of the fossil fuel industry. And there's a lot of vested industries there, something like a $500 trillion asset base, on top of which sit some very powerful people who don't want to be unseated.
Sure.
Which they would be if technology comes out.
$500 trillion.
It's around $500 trillion.
That's the worth of it worldwide. Whoa.
That's a figure I read from a report by Stephen Greer, which was a very comprehensive report. So that's where I'm getting that figure from. It's a big industry. It's a lot of ancillary.
It's the biggest industry with the along with the pharmaceutical industry and the arms industry. They're the biggest industries in the world.
Yeah, war's the biggest industry, isn't it?
Yeah, I think war's the biggest. Yeah.
But what do you put in your tank to make it go?
Exactly.
What do you put in your airplane to make it go? What do you make pesticides out of? Everything, food, power is the biggest industry, by far.
Sure.
War is a power industry, really. It's power people. But as I say, if there was no aviation spirit, there'd be no Predator drones.
True.
Roll on that day, it'd be a great day.
Yeah.
So the story with Rossi then is that everyone, there's two camps of people, basically. People who are optimistic and hopeful and willing to give the guy the benefit of the doubt, and then the skeptics. But the skeptical argument is getting harder to maintain, because science is coming out validating the reality of LENR. One of Rossi's fiercest critics is a guy called Stephen Crivet, runs a website called New Energy Times, and he thinks Rossi's a charlatan, but he's absolutely adamant that LENR is real. But I mean, when I say LENR now, the term cold fusion was the term used to describe this up until relatively recently, but it's not entirely accurate. So they've renamed it as low energy nuclear reactions, which is the term for what's happening in these reaction chambers.
Okay.
Now what Rossi has physically is it's a small chamber which is about 50 cc's, it's around the size of a golf ball, something like that, into which he puts the fuel, which is nickel powder of the micro size. It's not nanoparticles or anything. It's not something complicated, very complicated to manufacture. Nickel is a very abundant element. I think it's the 5th most abundant element. There's a lot of nickel. So the nickel is the main fuel, and then he pressurizes this chamber with hydrogen gas, and there's an electrically powered heating element in it, heats it up. And when you heat it up to a certain temperature, they said 60 initially, but I think now it's something like 150 degrees. Not very hot anyway. A reaction starts in which because the nickel and the hydrogen are close atomically, the hydrogen sheds neutrons, I believe, and they interact some way with the nickel powder to fill in holes, positions in the lattice structure that it's formed in.
Yeah.
And huge amounts of energy are released in the form of heat. So you take that reaction chamber and he puts a water jacket around it, like a copper assembly or steel. I think it looks like copper in the pictures. And water is passed through that, sent through by a conventional pump. And when it gets to the area of the chamber, it's heated up into steam, basically, and the steam comes out an outlet. And once you have a steam production device. You just hook that either to a space heater, a water heater, or an electrical turbine to spin, cause it to spin, as conventional power stations powered by fossil fuels do. And when it spins, you generate electricity. So that's his device. As I say, the box is it looks to be about the size of a desktop computer. Energy output of that is stated to be around 10 kilowatts, I think. Yeah, 10 kilowatts, I'm sure. The figures keep changing because he's developing it on further. But basically, it's enough to power a house or two on average power consumption of your average house.
Yeah, it's amazing.
What he's looking at coming to market with is a box that you could put anywhere in your house that you plug into. You plumb into your power systems, your heating and your electrical systems, and it'll power your house. Now, if that's something that comes to be a reality, the implications of it are hard to get your head around, because the whole dynamic of how we deal with power changes, because it would change from a centralized, expensive distribution service in which the money goes from us back up the power lines, basically, to some rich capitalists.
So it would stop the likes of the the fraud on the peak oil, which is apparently a myth, that there's still plenty of oil there regardless whether he wants to take it out of the ground or not. Also, the price fixing that goes on between the capitalist countries and the oil producing countries, OPEC countries as well, with that monopoly.
Yeah, exactly. It would just make them irrelevant.
Yeah.
It would, and as you say, you could leave the oil in the ground. There's a big debate: is it peak oil? Is it not peak oil? Physically, I don't think it's peak oil, but in commercial, economic, reality-wise, it's peak oil if they just say it's peak oil.
Exactly, because they have a monopoly on the market.
If they more oil, we're going to charge you whatever we feel like for the remaining. They create reality that way,
Well, if you look at it this way, Paul, I mean, it's like $4 for like a gallon of petrol in America. Do you know what I mean? Where it's €2 now for a litre in this country.
Yeah.
Do you know what I mean? So the Americans control the flow of oil, because they're the ones who control all of the oil that comes out of the Middle East and all of the other rich oil fields around the world, pretty much. And because as you know, the dollar is the reserve currency for the planet, and that it's only got value because it's linked to petrol. It's called a petrodollar.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely.
So I mean, really, the implications of a technology like you're talking about is astronomical globally, if it was to be mass produced.
Yeah, it's off the chart, the implications of it, which is why it's important to be aware of it. So the more people are aware of things like this, the less chance there is for people like this to go missing, because it's happened before.
Sure, but with the
electric car,
electric car,
you're probably aware, Stanley Myers, who created an engine, a fuel cell basically that cracks water into hydrogen and oxygen. You put it fit it into your car engine space, and take the outlet and put it into your inlet manifold, essentially, and run your car on hydrogen. And he had his dune buggy running on it.
Yeah.
And he signed a contract with the U.S. Department of Defense and died of food poisoning in a restaurant in Ohio the next day.
The next day. So don't waste any time today.
Next day. But that was a coincidence.
They don't even allow him to have a little bit more relaxing time, a bit more family time. Just next day, you're gone.
Yeah,
Jesus.
Thanks for that contract. See you later. But you see, this is why I think, Andrea Rossi has been very inscrutable, and he's a clever guy. When you read his comments on his blog, he's not a conventional scientist per se. He's quite he's obviously a very well read man, and his comments are funny, he knows
like
how to deal
yourself,
with
Paul.
people. Like yourself too, yeah. Have a laugh. But so back to it anyway. So he is supposedly coming out with this device very soon, and he stated the price around $4,000 6 months ago. He's since come out and said that as they're advancing the technology and honing the prototype, the price is coming down to under $1,000. So if you look at the cost of, say, a conventional oil burner to put in your house, I'm not sure how much they are, but I'm sure they're like 1,000 or 1,500 euros or something like that. Then you have to buy the oil or gas, whatever you're fueling it on.
Mm-hmm.
So if you look at the capital outlay for one of these devices, plus the cost of fuel, say the price of buying it is, say, 1,000 euros. Let's just say it's in that ballpark. But the fuel is so cheap that you could count it as free, really. It'll be in the tens of dollars or euros per year fuel cost, which is the big, because it's a nuclear type of reaction, you're getting enormous energy from a small amount of material. And there is where the significance of it comes. You'll have what's essentially a standalone off-grid device which costs next to nothing to buy or run. Now, if you apply everything, like I said before, is an energy balance. If the cost of energy becomes negligible, the access to all the things that we use energy for becomes bigger, and by that I mean across the board of engineering, social, artistic, everything. As cheap energy changes the way we do everything. Takes the survival struggle off people. Which, let's say again, we're all stuck in this rat race artificially because of a lot of things, but because of the price of energy, even that one thing, if that was changed, the rest would fall away. So it's something that, sooner the better. But I mean, this is just one guy. Rossi has it. Rossi is working with a Nobel laureate physicist called Sergio Focardi. Now, Focardi, he approached Focardi. He's emeritus professor in Bologna University, I think. Yeah, it is. And he approached Focardi to come work with him because he was worried about, was he irradiating himself? He didn't know anything about nuclear science, really. And Focardi came down to check, and he checked and said, no, there's no radiation coming off it. You're safe enough. Yeah. And he got interested. So Rossi offered him, they made a bet basically, said, I bet you $1,000 or 10 grand or something, that you can't find information to say that this isn't real. And Focardi, the physicist, nuclear physicist, couldn't. So he stayed and he's working with him. So even to listen to interviews with this man, you'd have to consider what he's saying and consider it as valid, This guy knows what he's talking about.
Yeah.
But there's another company called Defcalion who Rossi was supposed to be coming to an arrangement with, that they would manufacture. He would supply the core science, the core intellectual property, right? And they would develop the manufacturing end. Now they felt they split. He didn't believe that they had the money in escrow to provide what they said they provided, manufacturing capability. So he cancelled their contract. But they are proceeding independently now, according to what they say, having spent a lot of time working on this technology. They've done a lot of engineering, and they said that they're going to progress, that they've developed a similar technology but different, and they're going to come to market in competition. Now they're saying that they're coming out, launching in July. They have a website called defcaliongreenenergy.com, and they have a lot of information up there, and they're hiring. And if they come out, fantastic too. There's nothing wrong with competition.
Absolutely. No, you need competition. Competition is healthy.
Yeah, exactly.
In any marketplace, competition is healthy. Monopolies always lead to tyranny. Because once you have a monopoly, then you control a certain aspect of any market, and then you get to charge whatever the hell you want, which is pretty much what the oil companies have, because they're only owned really by a handful of people at the end of the day.
Yeah, they have a total monopoly. I mean, that monopoly, man, you couldn't apply it more correctly than to those people. They're the original monopoly men. They have the monopoly on everything. And money goes to money. If you get a monopoly in one industry and you use the money that you create, you gain from your monopoly to become major shareholders in all the other main industries, they have it all summed up.
Mm-hmm.
And the state of the world is the result, the very bad state it's in. Mm-hmm. So something that would allow the shift of power and economic power to go back to the people would be the solution to that, you know. So like what I see with this, with the ECAT, and I'll just say as well, we're talking about ECAT, LENR. These are just possibilities. If they come out soon, great. If something else that does the same thing comes out soon or sooner, equally great. I'm reading a thing called, for the listeners and yourself, if you go to a website called blacklightpower.com, very interesting thing there. This is a company who have got validation from 6, and I've read the reports here, 6 credentialed independent assessors, people like from California Institute of Technology, Massachusetts Institute of Technology, at a Fortune 500 company, a firm from a Fortune 500 company, to validate their technology, and they have validated it, and they said it's real. And what it is it's a fuel cell type arrangement where they produce, they have an anode and a cathode, which is like a battery setup, but they pass current through it, and they have small amounts of water in with the anode and cathode, in with the electrolyte in this setup, and what they get is they're changing the state of the hydrogen in the water to a lower energy state, and directly extracting electrical power from that reaction, and they are getting, you know, a huge amount of electrical power out of a very low electrical power input. And as I say, it's been validated. What they're doing now is they're going to further research it along the lines of refining their materials, and also to combine them up into, you basically stack these things. You have a certain amount of power out of one set of plates, and then when you stack them and combine them in series, you get more. So they're engineering upwards to the level of like a domestic size device. But the exciting thing about it is, in contrast to Rossi and Defcalion, this is confirmed now. Now they're 24 months from market with this. But my overall view with this subject is, this situation in Ireland that we have is a recession, you know, a recession caused by the collapse of the main industry, which the main industry created houses. We have enough houses now. That industry's not coming back. Nobody is dreaming that thinks it is. Like, enough houses here. There's an oversupply for the next 40 years. Like,
sure.
But we need a new industry. Now, what better industry than something that produces what will be the most devices with the greatest demand in history? If somebody comes out with a cheap energy device, everybody's going to want one. That business is going to thrive, guaranteed. Yeah. The problem with all these businesses is that they're suppressed, they're short of funds, and there's hostility from the establishment against them for obvious reasons. So I think in what we're doing with Awaken Ireland, if we could reach the situation where we attract, instead of attracting in companies from America who make pharmaceutical drugs and things like that, which aren't really of much benefit to the world when you look at it, you know, look at the facts, and instead attracting companies who make this type of thing, then we could have a whole new industrial
revolution,
reinvigoration, or revolution, or at least we could create a few jobs, and we could also have a supply of these devices, which we could install as at the soonest possible opportunity to solve our energy problems and needs, and make life easier for everybody.
You could power the car as well. You can use the what's that system that you call, where you split water to create the hydrogen that you need for a car.
Yeah. I mean, if you get a cheap energy supply, you can power everything, because like you said there, internal combustion engines run on petrol as we have them now, but they can run on gas just as easy with minimum modification. You just tweak it tiny bit, like
the carburetor,
and you can run a car on hydrogen. You can run a petrol engine certainly, and I think you can run a diesel engine with more modification. But whether you can or not, you can certainly run petrol engines.
Sure.
So the thing that's stopping people running cars on hydrogen is hydrogen's very expensive. But the way you create hydrogen is through electrolysis.
That's the word I was looking for, electrolysis.
Yeah, you pass electric current through water, and you strip it. You split the molecules of H2O into H and O, and then you get a mixture, an atomic gas of hydrogen and oxygen mixed. Perfect fuel. But it's expensive because the electricity is expensive. But if the electricity was cheap, then you can create hydrogen in large quantities, and you can run your car on hydrogen. So in that one thing, we would remove the need for petrol and diesel.
Yeah.
And that would make a massive
also,
difference.
Paul, that what you could do is that we could turn Ireland into a growing paradise, and we could feed most of Europe. We could have polytunnels all over the country, and we could be growing all sorts of fruit and vegetables that out of season that you wouldn't normally be able to grow, because you'd be able to power lighting and heating that would normally be impossible to do. It wouldn't be worth your while. It would cost too much money with normal energy sources that we have here in the country, fossil fuel burning and stuff like that, you know.
Absolutely. And even further than that, we can do, and I think we should. And I think if we all focus our minds to it, we can do whatever we want. You know, the only limit to what people can do is imagination. Imagination is in your head, and it's infinite. You know, you can do anything.
Yeah.
So, this country could feed Europe. It could feed beyond. You know, there's fields full of grass here, that can be full of polytunnels, crops. As you say, if you've got a cheap energy source, you can heat these tunnels all year round. It doesn't matter if there's 6 foot of snow outside, your tunnel will still be hot.
Yeah.
Also, if you have cheap energy, when you your cost for refrigeration, packaging, transport, all really, really reduce. So, I mean, if you look at various areas around the world where people are hungry, those people want food, you know. We're stuck up in this paradigm of EU trade regulations and international trade regulations, and the whole thing, along with all of their regulations, is just designed to keep us in boxes and keep us down and over-regulate us, make life difficult. When you look at the base reality of it, there's a place that grows food here and there's hungry people over there. It's not rocket science, you know. We connect those two things.
And most people on the planet they're scratching their heads going, you know, with all of this wealth in the Western world, and you've got all of these chicks going around like with their 5 private planes and their harems and their cars made of gold and stuff, like, and there's, you have all of this poverty and people dying, and then they have ads on the telly for Troker, please donate here now, and most of that money is going to administration costs or being siphoned away by the corrupt leadership in those countries. You know, it's there's so much more that we can do with the technology. Even if we were to produce it for the West and feed the West, we could also then help the people that are not getting really the help they need right now to become self-sufficient and self-sustainable themselves, Paul, in places, certain countries in Africa, where they haven't been allowed to develop their societies at all, really, you know.
Yeah. And when you're looking at those countries that are, say, countries in Africa, it's the typical one, you know, the picture on the Troker box. There are huge amounts, many countries in which those situations are a reality. And even besides implementing this technology in Ireland, those countries can implement it themselves. Africa is a rich place, except for, as you say, the extreme level of inequality. The people in charge are fleecing the poor people and keeping them down. And again, it goes into sovereignty, doesn't it? If those people were in charge of themselves and they had the survival struggle removed, then Africa would flourish. Look at all the creativity and artisticness, and music has come out of Africa. We've come out of Africa, you know. So absolutely. I mean, if for example, with cheap energy, you can desalinate water. If you can desalinate water, that's the end of drought. You know, we're all sick of hearing about droughts on the news. It's very upsetting and it's very depressing. But that can be made a thing of the past with cheap energy. You pump in seawater, desalinate it, and you set up proper agriculture, proper irrigation, and again, you'd create employment in those areas. You'd create, increased self-esteem. There's a lot you can do. Cheap energy can revolutionize the whole planet, you know.
Yeah.
And it needs somewhere to be the catalyst for it to go, right, okay, we know these exist. Come over here and let's do it. Let's stop the questions, the vagueness and the grey areas, and go, you have a technology, here's some money, develop it, and let's go,
So just to finish up there, Paul, how close are we to actually having this in our homes, do you think? Or having it even let's not even go that far, having one that we can actually use as a pilot project here in Ireland, in our town someplace. Within
6 months, I hope.
Brilliant.
But the key point is, that's if people demand it. If everybody demanded it tomorrow, we'd get it by next week, because of the way, because of a lot of different reasons,
Yeah.
But with the small number of people who are aware of this at the moment, if we are sitting back waiting for these to become available, I think it's, from what I've studied, is 6 months, because I have my name down. Andrea Rossi put out a thing on his website a few months ago that said, if I get 10,000 names, if he gets 10,000 names, requests for to buy an ECAT, he'll put them 10,000 names down for the first 10,000 production run. And if he got 300,000, so
wow.
That list is still current. So I mean, as soon as the first ones come out, hopefully we'll be able to get one.
Yeah.
The same for Defcalion. Well, not the same, but they have said that they're launching in July. So we'll see. But ideally, the sooner the better would be what I'm trying to say. Ideally, it would be great to get technological companies and university departments, research centres, to become aware of this and to investigate it themselves, and to maybe form some sort of consortium or a co-op to say, okay, let's take your technology under license and manufacture it here.
Great. Well, Paul, you're down in Waterford this weekend at the Project Awaken conference, isn't that right?
Yeah.
And you are on Sunday from 12 to 1 o'clock.
Yeah,
Isn't that true?
That's true, yeah. So everyone come along. The Project Awaken thing is it's a great lineup. So actually, it's going to be over by the time this airs, James.
It will be over by the yeah.
So thanks everybody for coming to the Project Awaken. Great to see you all. I had a great time.
But you'll be talking about this stuff anyway, Paul, won't you?
I will, yeah.
And other things as well, not just LENR, but other things too, as far as I believe. Is that correct?
That's true, yeah. More or less what we just went through here.
Great. So, well, it's very exciting, Paul, and thanks again for coming on the show. And I see you in the next couple of hours.
Yeah. Okay, man. Great talking to you as usual. See you soon.
Earlier in the week, I did a pre-recorded interview with Robin Wilson, who was part of the Occupy Dame Street movement, and I spent a good hour and a half talking to Robin about all sorts of stuff, from the economy to the political establishment that's in place, to the Occupy movement, to standing as an independent in the last election, and many other topics as well. And here is an interview with Robin, so I hope you enjoy this. And on Skype we have Robin Wilson. Robin, you're very welcome to the show.
Thanks very much, James. Nice to be here.
Yeah, it's great to have you on, Robin. You were actually the first person that I met at the Occupy Dame Street National Convention meeting that we had there. It was earlier in the year. And
yeah. God, it seems like a long time ago now, doesn't it?
It does. So much has happened since then. It's just incredible. Like I arrived up, and a few carloads of us arrived up from Waterford, and we got the Dart in, Lewis, into town. Had a bit of food, came in, and there's loads of people. There's a lot of people around actually, and you were just happened to be the first person that was there, and you were very friendly, I have to say, and very approachable. And you just told me a few stories. But we won't go into that yet. We'll maybe wait a while before we go into what you told me that particular day, because I want to just find out about you, and find out about your background, where you're coming from, why you decided to get involved in activism in the first place, and where you are today with it, and what's happening. So how did it all start with you, Robin?
Well, I've always had a big interest in politics and kind of, especially international politics and so on. And it took me to, I started doing a master's in international relations,
Okay.
which is, it's kind of it's a very interesting course. It's about sort of international politics, economics, history, and how they all converge and interact.
Yeah.
So I'd read quite a lot about the IMF and the World Bank and those types of organizations, and the type of, I suppose, what you could call neocolonialism since the Bretton Woods Agreement.
Okay. Would you like to would you like to go into some detail about that first before we move on to the next section, because that's quite interesting, because I've read a lot about that myself, the Bretton Woods and the World Bank and the UN and all these international organizations. What's your take on these organizations?
Well, I've read a fair bit about them, so there are different angles you can come at. But one way that was put to me before, which I think is a very good way of looking at it, although again it's only one perspective, is that after the Second World War, the conquest of resources through military means became a big no-no. Traditionally, the stronger powers in the world had always, used empire as a means of getting their hands on resources.
Yeah.
All sorts of resources, whatever they may be, and that became a big no-no after the Second World War, after the actions of Japan and Germany, and certainly the victors in that conflict couldn't seem to be using those means of getting resources again.
Mm.
So at Bretton Woods, you had the IMF and World Bank set up, and these are, as we know, they're largely funded by private banks and multinational corporations. In the context of resources around the world, the modus operandi has been that instead of actually militarily attacking a country,
Mm-hmm.
a much easier way to get resources was to get them in debt to such an extent that they weren't able to pay back with money, that it was just whatever the terms of the loan were pretty much impossible to pay back in cash terms. So you would take something in lieu to sort out the debt.
Mm-hmm.
Generally, it would be something like oil, copper, gold, whatever resources a country may have that they could pay in lieu of debt.
Sure.
And that has been the modus operandi for multinational corporations to get their hands on resources in poorer parts of the world, basically since the Bretton Woods Agreement. Now, of course, one of the main sort of insights you'll ever get into this, one of the more well-known ones, is from John Perkins, who wrote Confessions of an Economic Hitman.
Sure, yeah.
And if any of your listeners haven't yet either read the book or seen some of his interviews on YouTube, I highly recommend it. If you go to YouTube and just put in John Perkins Confessions of an Economic Hitman,
Mm-hmm.
there are half-hour, 45-minute interviews recorded there where he explains how the IMF and the World Bank actually go about loading these poorer countries with debt and subsequently taking their resources.
Yeah.
And he's been quite clear about it, that the IMF will generally only go into a country after they've identified some sort of assets that the country has, and they will offer them a loan for some sort of infrastructure project,
Yeah.
or they will maybe encourage some sort of financial crisis in the country, come in as the lender of last resort with interest rates on the loan which are higher than the country's GDP growth,
Mm-hmm.
which is a situation we find ourselves in. And once you have a country stuck like that, whereby their GDP growth is lower than the interest of the loans they're repaying, then you just have to sit and wait until their economy is squeezed to such an extent that there's no more cash left to pay the loan, so they go taking something in lieu.
Sure.
Now, this is we're straying slightly from the original question you asked, which is how I got into these things.
Mm-hmm.
But I've always had a big interest in sort of the IMF and the World Bank, and how this type of sort of new imperialism, an imperialism that's generally without military conflict, how this has been sort of the way that resources and assets have been transferred from the poorer parts of the world to the richer corporations since Bretton Woods. So when there was a question of the IMF coming into this country, well, actually, when there was talk of them going into Iceland originally, I actually set up a campaign to try and, if I can just go off on this tangent for a moment.
Please do.
Yeah, I set up a campaign. It was mostly over Facebook, where I set up a page called Icelanders Google John Perkins Confessions of an Economic Hitman, and on the page I said that the IMF are more than likely after your geothermal resources, because the geothermal resources in Iceland are the only, using those resources, it's the only way that aluminium can be processed in a cost-effective way.
Oh, serious?
Aluminium is extremely expensive to process, and everywhere that it's done, it has to be subsidized.
All right.
But using the free energy from Iceland's geothermal resources, you can effectively do it.
What you're saying, Robin, is that the volcanic activity on that island creates free hot steam.
Exactly. Basically, the magma under the Earth's crust is very close to the surface at Iceland, and you effectively, in basic terms, you stick pipes down where it's very hot, and you get free energy that way.
Okay.
So Iceland is one of the few places in the world that has this abundant geothermal energy.
Along with Hawaii as well. That'd be another place that would have it, wouldn't it?
Yeah, it probably does. Yeah, it probably does. But,
that's very interesting.
Some of the larger corporations have been trying to get into Iceland for this geothermal energy to process aluminium.
Yeah.
Which really destroys the environment. So the Icelanders were having none of it.
Yeah.
Now, when the IMF started circling Iceland over their banking crisis, I took the view that to some extent their financial crisis was being used to get access to this. So anyway, I put all this on a Facebook page.
Yeah. And what was the reaction, Robin?
Sorry?
What was the reaction to that?
I got a great reaction. People started spreading it among themselves over there. Now, I don't say that I've never thought that that had any influence on sort of what the Icelandics did, but what I did take satisfaction in was that my judgment appeared to be kind of along the lines of how things worked out. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
That John Perkins ended up going to Iceland, telling them, well, the IMF are only here because they're after something, probably your geothermal resources.
Mm-hmm.
And subsequently, the Icelandics said they weren't paying this odious bank debt.
Yeah.
And we know the rest is history. We know where they are now.
Well, can I ask you, Robin, have you read a book called The Tipping Point by Malcolm Gladwell?
No, I've read a couple of excerpts of it, but I haven't read it. But
it's definitely worth a read. It's a very short book. I'm reading it at the moment, and it talks about the idea of connectors, as in people who network, who have a very, very large circle of friends. And these are people that would be few and far between in society, but everybody knows a few of them. And the idea is that these people they have naturally very strong social skills, and you really only need to have one or two connectors in your own sphere of influence. And that if you make a connection with a connector, well, then you really are connecting with, thousands of people. You've heard of the saying, the 5 degrees of separation. Yeah.
Yes.
It comes from that book. That's where it comes from. It comes from the studies that are included in that book, and it's about connectors and mavens. And mavens are also is a name terminology he used in the book for people who like to study markets. and have all the facts and figures and to know the best price of everything, the best value, and like to share it with people, right? So all I'd say to you is, even though we'll never know whether your influence in the page that you created at the time had an influence on Iceland, it's also quite possible that it did. If you look at that book and look at the outcomes of certain studies that were done, that were started from a very, very simple a small group of people, and really did spread nationwide. An example he uses, the Hush Puppies shoes were started by people in the fashion industry who decided they want to wear Hush Puppies one day, and within 6 months it was actually nationwide in America, and every store had one. And they didn't really know how that happened, so they went and they actually did a study on it, and they realised that certain people in the fashion world who were the connectors, they decided they were going to start wearing Hush Puppies, and then they started to connect with other people. All of a sudden, you got your tipping point.
Yeah.
So you don't know, but all I say to you is, the timing was probably very good as well. The fact that you put that page up at that time, and you just don't know. I mean, and also you have your synchronicities that I'm seeing around me all the time, and you can't ignore them. Where you have your timing, where you have an idea, someone else has the same idea someplace else. You mightn't even know each other, but all of a sudden you converge.
Yeah. I'm a big believer in sort of the sort of connectedness of ideas.
Yeah.
There's a wee story I heard before about on Japan. There was these two islands with monkeys on them.
Oh yeah, the 100 monkey effect, yeah.
Yeah, the story, where this new fruit came up on one of the beaches of one of the islands, and the monkeys weren't able to get at the fruit, and then one of them managed to find a way of chipping away at a certain part of it and then bashing it, and you could open the fruit. And they've been trying. The monkeys have been playing with these things for weeks and haven't been able to do it. But once this guy did it on one island, a couple of days later on another island, another monkey picked it up and did the same thing. The point being that their ideas were in some way connected. That anyway, I think it's slightly what we're talking about.
It's the same thing, yeah. It's the same thing. They intuitively pick up the new skill after a certain amount of time. That's another book
exactly.
I read as well.
It becomes part of intuition or whatever.
Yeah, you get your tipping point.
I to be honest, I've never thought that the wee Facebook page I did had any good. It was more I got more satisfaction from the fact that it was that at the time, I told a couple of my friends what I was doing, and they said, you really have to start getting a life,
Yeah.
Setting up Facebook pages and inviting random Icelandic people to join. It's kind of odd behaviour,
Yeah.
So from that point of view, I got a bit of satisfaction then when John Perkins did get involved in Iceland, just purely from the point that I wasn't going mad at the time,
Yeah. But you just had a vision of what could be done, and that's really the problem that we face at the moment in the world is that people are stuck in routine and they rely on the structures that are in place, and unless people have visions of an alternative way of doing things, that we can never escape the clutches of the banksters that are out there, because that's. I mean, at the end of the day, you mentioned at the start of the interview there that you were very interested in what was going on with the banksters internationally, because the problem does lie with economics, and it's very closely tied with politics. So it's all the same thing, really. Like I said, I mean, military dominance is what controlled resources before, and now it's economic dominance, because if you indebt a nation, like I said, well, then you control everything in the country, and then you get all the value, the real wealth, which is the energy from people and the physical matter that is in that land, whatever can be extracted from the ground or grown.
Exactly, yeah.
You know where I'm coming from.
Yeah, exactly, and that's why we see a situation now whereby most of the major exploration companies, the likes of Shell and so on, they're owned mostly by banks. Because of the trouble, and let's not forget that the trouble that the dollar is in particular has been happening since the 1970s. That it's only its reserve currency status that is making it hold its value. Everybody has to trade in order, so that they have to use dollars. to do that. That the problems of the American of the American currency in particular, and the false value that it has, have been seen since the 70s, and since then the major banks have been getting into exploration and resources and concrete assets, so that if everything goes belly up, they're left owning, for example, Ireland's water supply, which is what we're seeing at the moment. That we're being set up for privatization, and I was told, and I don't know how reliable this is, that the IMF had already buyer for our water system before they came in. When we were being told,
they already had a buyer for our water supply.
Yeah, they've someone lined up.
Okay.
That's what I was told by. You hear things and somebody says they have it told reliably. I don't have any way of backing up, of checking that source at this stage.
Yeah.
But
that'll lead into the very interesting conversation that I had with you when I met you then in Dame Street, and you mentioned that an oil executive approached you. Would you like to tell that story?
Yeah, no problem. This guy who had been in the oil industry approached me, and he was saying that this government knows basically it knows that we have quite a lot of oil and gas off our coast, and that it's also well known within the oil industry. And what this guy said is, he said everyone's afraid of the oil industry, but the only people who are more afraid than the average punter of the oil industry are the people who work in it. So you're not going to get very many people putting their head above the parapet to say, we're pretty confident that Ireland has over $1 trillion worth of oil and gas in their, out in their seas.
Yeah.
So, where it's hard to know where we're supposed to find out just how much is there. It's we're going to find it in our media, because one of our media tycoons has been able to buy up most of the oil and gas licenses around the country.
You're talking about O'Brien, is it?
I'm talking about O'Reilly.
O'Reilly, sorry.
Yeah, since the 70s, or since the late 70s, early 80s, I think, he's basically had a free hand to buy up the prospects around our coast. And
is Providence one of his companies, Robin? Do you know?
Sorry?
Is Providence one of his companies? Providence that's drilling off the coast of Cork.
Yeah, Providence Resources is his main one.
Right.
And what they do is they get in sort of expertise to do some of the tests, the seismic geology tests and so on. And when they're pretty sure they have a find, then they get the big boys in, the likes of Shell. I stand to be corrected on this, but I'm pretty sure Shell started off as the Corrib Basin started off as a Providence Resources prospect.
Okay.
And then it turned out that there was gas, and now Shell are in. Actually, there's another one they have called the Dunquin. I'd just like to bring this up.
Okay.
Just for your listeners, it's something I want people to be aware of. There was a prospect off about a couple of 100 miles off the coast of Kerry called the Dunquin oil field. People should Google information on that.
Mm-hmm.
One of the press releases said that it would have 4 billion barrels of high-grade crude oil, and that, along with that, there's also even more higher value of natural gas. But 4 billion barrels of oil would equate to roughly $400 billion. And
that's just one field. That's just one oil field.
Oh, that's one oil field. Yeah, $400 billion worth of oil. Now, there was a recent Providence owned this. They've got ExxonMobil down there at the moment. Providence owned this, and they're walking a fine. Providence have to walk a fine line. They don't want the national the national public to be too aware of what's going on down there. Yet they have to kind of give information out for investors to come in and do this. But one of their press releases said, pretty confident there's around 4 billion barrels of oil. That's $400 billion. Now,
savage.
If we'd oil and gas terms like the people of Norway do, that's 78% tax would go on that.
Mm-hmm.
Now let's knock off 50 billion as exploration costs.
Yeah.
Even though I believe it's dramatically less than that.
Okay.
We'll say that.
Mm-hmm.
So we're talking about then roughly 3/4 of 350 billion.
Mm-hmm.
You know what I mean? What are we talking there? Call it $250 billion.
Yeah.
But we'll never get to see, while the IMF are in charge of this country, while we've lost our sovereignty,
mm-hmm.
the IMF and the Troika effectively make all these decisions.
Mm.
So for the sake of a $68 billion bailout, the 68 billion euro bailout on money that we never actually owed, we're losing the rights to $250 billion pure profit in oil.
Massive money, yeah.
In that one oil field. We've
Yeah.
got many, many more oil fields. We've one of the biggest territorial waters in Europe.
It's 23% of the territorial waters of Europe, apparently.
Yeah.
And just to mention fishing, we're allowed to fish 2% of that?
Yeah, absolutely. It's I'm sure you know this, but I'll say it just for your listeners in case they're not aware. It was made a condition of the year before Ireland and Britain joined the EEC. They brought in a common fisheries area thing because the two islands coming into the EU, into the EEC as it was then, would be bringing in a huge amount of territorial waters. So it was made a condition of us joining that we sign up to this common fisheries area. Now, obviously, a country like Belgium without much fishing waters, it would suit them fine to agree this in the European Parliament or the Commission, whatever it was that brought this in. So it was made a condition of us giving up our fishing territories to join the EEC.
Yeah, and they got a payment of a couple of $100 million or something like that.
Yeah. It's been estimated that it's a bit of a contentious issue how much potential revenue we lost from our fishing by joining, because our fishing industry wasn't developed at that time to take full advantage of it.
Sure.
So people who say we didn't forget about the fish would say that,
Mm.
But if you do look at the potential, it's estimated to be a €3 billion a year industry.
Yeah.
And that's a $3 billion a year industry that doesn't have multinationals creaming most of it off.
Mm-hmm.
It's our fish in our waters, costing us nothing. You've got the canning plants, all the all the development that there would be of the western seaboard and everything else. $3 billion a year, all the people that would employ.
Mm-hmm.
That's over 40 years. So people put the estimate at maybe we've lost a potential 120 billion. And we've received from the EU since we joined 60 billion in structural funds and farm subsidies. So, even before we started being fleeced through our banks, we were losing. Roads and the benefits that we can see from the EU, they're concrete things and it looks great. But in real terms, we lost a hell of a lot more than we gained.
Also, Robin, just to mention there as well that when you say part funded by the European Union, right, what they're saying is we've given you a loan to build the roads and you got to pay it back.
Right.
It's not free money. People think it is.
No,
it's actually it's given the impression it's free by these signs you see all over the country, but it's actually not free at all.
Yeah. But you see, it goes down to the corruption of our politics,
Yeah.
The purpose of politics is to get re-elected. So if your party is the one that has been seen to get all this free money from Europe, then you're a hero, and that's all it takes.
Yeah.
You know, farmers have more votes than fishermen, so that's why we didn't put up a fight to our fisheries being given away. It's corrupt politicians along with outside forces who are looking at our resources, licking their lips. You know.
Yeah. Yeah. So looking at the political system, that's something that you dipped your toes into. You actually had a look at it, and you decided you wanted to run as an independent. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Well, yeah, like I was saying earlier, once I heard there was any question of the IMF coming in, I thought, you know, our politicians aren't telling us anything about this. So I just felt this compulsion to stand in the election to at least get the point across. So I have to say it was a great experience. I stood on a platform of basically there were four main issues. First one being that sorry, can you just excuse me a minute? Someone just come into the room.
Yeah.
I stood on a platform of basically four issues. The first one being that our sovereignty being given away was completely unacceptable. That it would have to go to referendum, and the first priority of any government after the election would be to take back our sovereignty.
Yeah.
And the next thing then would be obviously that we would have to stop the socialising of bank debt.
Mm-hmm.
You know, the banks would have to play by the rules of capitalism, and foreign banks would have to take their losses, and so on. Then I said that we'd also have to leave the euro, that it was completely incompatible with our economy, being tied to German interest rates, that the economy overheated because we were tied to artificially low interest rates, and that it was very difficult. There weren't very many economic means available to us to smother the property boom while the ECB interest rates were being set tailored exclusively to the German economy.
Yeah.
And then I went on quite a bit about our natural resources. So it was a great experience.
Did you get much opportunity to speak to the media in relation to these points?
Yeah, I did local radio stations, local newspapers, and then I got to send politicians are allowed send out one of those what are they called? You know those little slips you get sent out with the politician's name on it, vote for me, blah blah blah.
Yeah.
All politicians that run the general election are entitled to get those sent out.
Funding, yeah, for that.
Yeah, the postage is funded. You just have to pay for the printing.
Right.
So it's quite a cheap way of getting your message across to every household.
Sure.
So I filled mine with information, just information about you know, our natural resources, what was being handed away, what we don't know about, blah blah blah. And I used it more as an information thing, and saying that these are the points that I would be, you know, that I'm standing under.
Yeah.
So I was very happy how I did. And one of the sitting TDs told me that it costs about 30 grand to get elected, which I can see now is about right.
Wow.
And I think overall I'd around, I don't know, in the end it worked out to be about 2.5 grand, I think I did to collect.
Right.
So I was never really a contender to win it, you know.
Yeah, it's all about the money, isn't it? Still, that system.
Yeah, and under Bertie Ahern, a system was brought in whereby for general elections, candidates can get funded in proportion to the number of seats their party holds in the Dáil. So, for example, Fianna Fáil or even Fine Gael would have had around 40 grand per candidate.
Yeah.
Last general election. The smaller parties would have had a lower proportion. and independents are on their own. So they effectively made it a closed shop, you know. Well, unless you have 30, 40 grand to spend on an election. And I suppose it is possible if you start early enough with fundraising and so on. But unless you have that, it's very, very difficult to get elected.
Yeah, I can see that. So let's have a look, Robin, at the actual system itself, because I've been having a look at this, you know, with a jaundiced eye for quite a while, you know.
Yep.
And I'm a generalist. I look at lots of different things, and I try to, you know, add the different jigsaw pieces together, you know.
Yeah.
And the system that we have, it's basically it's a modern version of the feudal system that we have, with a Shakespearean type play that we have. So corporations have replaced monarchy, as in at the front, as the controllers, and the actual Dáil and the Senate replaced the court system, which is the play for the general public, to keep everybody happy. In England, you have the Commons and you've got the House of Lords. I mean, how in your face is that? I mean, the Commons, your commoners, and here's your representatives for you.
Yeah.
Do you know what I mean? And
I see what you're saying. Yeah.
And the idea is that you get elected, whether you're massively influenced and controlled by party politics. Like you said, they can centralize all of the funding, right? In party politics, and they're also open to lobbying as well, where they're pretty much controlled by whoever lobbies them, because money is the power. So if you don't have any money, you can't get elected, and then once you're in there, then you have an obligation to the people who financed your campaign in the first place.
Yeah.
And when you get in there, Robin, right, you're sitting there, and if you get into power, you form a government with other parties, right? You're sitting across from these guys. You got a guy with a funny cloak on him, right? With a gavel banging away there, and you shout at each other, and nothing really ever gets done. You've got your legislative writers, the team people who write all of the the legislation that needs to be brought before the government, and really there's not much power from the opposition to be able to do anything about it, because the majority is in power. And all you get is jeering back and forth and personal insults and this one-upmanship. And instead of having a coherent, cohesive gathering of people together for the common good of society, what you have is a pantomime.
Absolutely, yeah. No, you're absolutely right. And then another thing to throw into the mix then is the party whip system.
Yeah, explain that for people, please, because a lot of people don't know that's very well kept. That's not talked about in generally in the media. It's kind of kept in the background. So could you explain how that works?
Yeah, well, as far as I know now, it was Charles Stewart Parnell who introduced it for the Irish Party back in the late 19th century, and basically what it was for at the time for the Irish Party to have an impact in the British Parliament and maybe hold the balance of power. They had to be a tight, cohesive unit, which meant that there would be what's called a party whip, which was the person who would hold the discipline of the party, and they would force all members of the party to vote on an agreed way on certain issues. Because at the time there used to be free votes, and the Whigs and the Tories, the Whigs would generally vote the way the party wanted them to, but if it didn't suit their constituents, they wouldn't. And same with the Tories. Whereas now you had this new force in the British Parliament, where you had, I think it was around 90 MPs voting as a unit on every issue.
Mm-hmm.
And this made the Whigs and the Tories take notice of them. And they said, well, if we could have them on our side, that's a big block of votes we'd be guaranteed of having.
All right, so it's about forming partnerships with other blocks, political blocks. That's how that came about then.
Well, yeah, basically, it was to. It wasn't at the time out of necessity. The Irish Party could only get things done by being in partnership with the Whigs or the Tories on certain issues. It wasn't an actual coalition situation, but they could agree that for certain issues, vote with us on this, then we'll grant you this on that issue, and so on. So that's how the party whip system came about. Unfortunately, it's now been adopted both in Ireland and Britain. It's been adopted elsewhere in the world, where political parties now only vote as a unit. And what that means is that where you have a situation like our current Dáil, where Fine Gael were lucky enough to cash in on the anti-Fianna Fáil vote, between them and Labour, they've got an untouchable majority. You could nearly look at it as they've got a parliamentary, what's the word? They've got a parliamentary autocracy now, whereby because of the party whip system, they're guaranteed that on every issue they can vote in whatever they want.
Yeah.
And that is not democracy, really. Another thing that was pointed out to me by someone who I suppose you could say is an insider in politics. They said that within each Irish political party, there's only maybe 2 or 3 people who actually write policy. The rest of them are just drones whose job it is to look pretty at election time, say the right things to the electorate to get elected, and then they slot right into the whip system and vote en masse however they're told to vote. Now,
and who are these people in Ireland? Who are these? Do you know who these people are that have the ability to write legislation, to write policy?
It's an issue that I think about quite a lot, and I can really only give you my opinion. I've never found out who they are. I told that Rabbit and Gilmore are 2 of them in Labour, and then there's 1 or 2 external people. In Fine Gael, the best that I could guess that 2 of them, the 2 main ones would be Charlie Flanagan and Phil Hogan.
Okay, and these guys would have a background in law or in accountancy or business practice or something like that to be able to sit down and write documents,
Yeah. And but what would concern me is that they've probably got a hotline to someone in Germany.
Yeah.
So someone in Angela Merkel's party who is kind of who they've agreed something with, agreed a general policy for Europe, and that they're meant to play along with this. So
yeah.
for all we know, so effectively what I'm saying is that if you can influence 2 or 3 people in the government parties, that's all you need. You don't have to worry about the backbenchers. They just do as they're told under the whip system. You only have to influence 2 or 3 people to influence government policy.
Yeah.
So it's quite a corruption of democracy as how democracy is meant to run. A representative democracy where people are meant to write legislature for the good of their constituents and the good of the country. It's a total corruption of that.
So what we've got is a bubble in Dublin, right, which is the Dáil, and in the structure of that bubble is a pyramid. And really, it's only one pyramid, not 2, where you have 2 main parties. It's pretty much just the 2 parties, kind of more or less the one party. And that's kind of what we're seeing right now, really. I mean, they're all singing from the same hymn sheet, from what I can see. This adopts the policies of the previous party that were in power. Because if you remember back to, the last election, which is the election that you ran for, isn't it?
Yeah.
That they were all saying, Eamon Gilmore and all the rest of them were saying that, that not 1 more cent would be paid out on the bonds and all that sort of crack. And as soon as they got into government, they just completely forgot what they said. Their election promise went out the window. There's no accountability at all.
Yeah, exactly. But that's the parochial nature of Irish politics. Fine Gael and Labour believed that it was their turn to be in power.
Yeah.
Fianna Fáil had it for long enough, and now it was our turn. And we've had, they had a lot of that all those years in opposition. They got a lot of funding from a lot of people who needed a lot of favours paid back, and they had to get into power because they deserved it, and they had a lot of favours to pay back, and so on. So there's just a formula of what you say at election time. You calculate, the people doing research, they calculate what the electorate wants to hear. So that's what you tell them, and that gets you the election. And then, 5 years of good wages.
Yeah, I didn't think of it that way, Robin. I think you hit the nail on the head there. I didn't actually think of it that way. Yeah, they actually have a debt to the funders, don't they?
Yeah, absolutely, yeah. There are, and you see, you have major players in the country, the likes of big corporations and so on, who fund all political parties. And in the lean years when Fianna Fáil looked like they were going to have their 1,000-year Reich because everything was going so well and people seemed to approve them and so on. A lot of the opposition people would have been relying on sort of big funders, people who would fund them through the lean times, when they weren't able to fundraise themselves quite so easily,
Yeah.
And so these big funders during the lean times are the ones who can now step up and say, well, remember we funded you for the last 10 years in opposition. Time for us to get a couple of favours repaid,
Yeah, and those companies did have their own legislative writers as well, wouldn't they? They'd have their own legal eagles behind the scenes that would have documents ready to go, like, wouldn't they?
Yeah, pretty much, yeah.
Yeah.
There's a... Yeah, sorry, go on.
Yeah, and I mean, they'd only be waiting, Rob. They'd only be waiting for their opportunity. And I mean, if you look at it this way, right? If you're a big multinational corporation, right, like a bank, I mean, we all know the banks are now, they're all centralized in Europe or through the Rothschild family or Goldman Sachs. And these are the ones who are actually putting new political leaders into places of authority. Like in Italy, Goldman Sachs put the latest prime minister into power. So we're very aware of this. So if you have that power, that basically it's called, you've probably heard of the Hegelian dialectic. You've heard of that, haven't you?
Yeah.
Yeah, you control both sides of it by funding both sides, right?
Yeah, exactly.
of a battle or politics. So what you can do is, if you're like a massive multinational corporation, like in banking in Europe, it's IAG, the Inter Alpha Group, which owns majority of the stakehold in the banking sector in Europe, right? Which is owned by the Rothschild family, right? And some of the monarchy. And they basically can control both sides of the political arena, which is two main parties. It's a two-party system, what we have, by funding both sides. They fund both sides.
Exactly,
so if you look at it from that point of view, what they can do then is they go, okay, now it's Fianna Fáil for the next 5 years, right? So what we're going to do is we're going to lash a load of money into them for, from now until the end of their term, and we'll actually be able to influence the policy then, very much so. And it doesn't really matter then if Fine Gael and Labour get it in the next term, because we'll just get them to continue on the policies, and if they don't, we pull the plug on the funding.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, yeah. I mean, it's a system that's it's more visible in America, say, when you're on the outside looking in.
Yeah,
it's quite obvious because it's the figures are there that Goldman Sachs put money into all the main candidates. Obama got huge money from Goldman Sachs.
Yeah,
it was really only publicized all the small donations he got. So it looked like he was brought to power by the people,
Yeah, sure.
That he'd got more sort of $20 checks in the post and so on than any other candidate.
Mm.
The real money was coming from the likes of Goldman Sachs and oil companies and so on.
Mm-hmm.
So they're really backing all horses in the race,
Yeah.
So it's easy for us to see it in the United States from the outside looking in. Mightn't be so visible to them over there because their media mightn't report it that way, but it's exactly the same over here.
It's no difference. It's just on a smaller scale, So can I ask, were you approached by any of these major parties when you were running as an independent? Were you on their radar? Was there any conversations?
Not really. I don't think it's ever seen as a big enough fish in the election to kind of be any sort of threat,
Yeah. Well, what do you see as an alternative, Robin, to the system that's in place? Is there an alternative?
Yeah, well, I suppose there really has to be. I think the system that we have now is not a version of democracy that can really be called democracy anymore.
Mm-hmm.
You're effectively voting for. You get a chance every 5 years to vote for a government which has nothing. You see, democracy is meant to be about people deciding their own destiny, people making decisions to decide their own destiny. What we're doing is we're delegating that responsibility every 5 years, and we get to dictate. We get to choose who we delegate it to.
Yeah.
If you can see what I'm saying.
I do.
And it's not. It's a system that's completely failed. There isn't any accountability in terms of the parties. Every single time there's an election, feel free to say whatever has to be said to get elected. They'll then behave in a way that suits the people that funded them to get in the first place. You know, it's a totally broken system.
Do you think that it was the initial intent of the Republic was to try and have a fair system for everybody? There's an awful lot of conflicting. Sorry, 1 second. There's a lot of conflicting history about what really happened with the Anglo-Irish Agreement. Yeah.
Yeah.
The film says that Michael Collins was sent over as a statesman to negotiate with Churchill. Yeah, and a few of the lords that were there at the time, as well, over the future of Ireland as an independent state, separate from the Crown. And there's conflicts there in history about who was the real driver of the Republic after that, before Collins was killed. You know, was it De Valera with his ideas for the future? Was it Michael Collins? Was it other people behind the scenes? Was it the Crown? Did the Crown still have complete and utter control through economics of the country?
Yeah, well, that's the big thing, you know. I suppose the question is, were we kind of given the appearance of a new republic, so that, you know, the post boxes could be painted green, and in all appearances it's a new state.
Yeah.
Whereas behind the scenes, who was really pulling the strings, I suppose, is the question.
Exactly. Well, if you look at it this way, I mean, the law system never changed. We still have Crown law in this country. If you go into any of the courts, they're dressed like the Crown courts in England, you know, in the British Empire. They talk like them, they act like them, and their system is based on summary judgment rather than justice, which is, they're not our laws at all. We had our own system of law here called the Brehon laws that were never reintroduced. I think they looked at it, but for some reason, and I don't know why, they never tried to bring our natural law system back into the modern world and to reinvigorate it and to modernize it, you know, and to try and make it work. That never happened. Not only that, they kept the sheriff system and just morphed that by calling it the registrars. That's how they got rid of the idea of the sheriffs, you know. And the county councils, they're not an Irish creation either. That's even the counties is an English system as well.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
Do you know? So nothing really changed. All they did was change the guard. The guard was changed, like you said. They painted the paint boxes the post boxes a different color, and they gave the people who were in uniform a different color uniform, and just wrote new legislation, and then they had a civil war.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. I mean, there were. There was an interest for a lot of. There was a lot of business and property interests in keeping the same system of maritime based law, and the whole contract system that was in place, because you still have huge gentry estates around the country. A lot of the industries were still controlled by British interests.
Sure.
So it would have been very much in their interest to to keep the legal system as it was to some extent, you know.
Well, it actually makes a lot of sense, and I'm glad you brought that up, Robin, because that's actually been something that's been in my head since I was a kid, actually. I couldn't figure out why there's all these huge, sprawling estates that were so illustrious and wealthy, and the most amazing walls and houses and they were all kept gorgeous. All over the country, they were everywhere, all over the country. And when I asked my father or other people, my teachers, who owns the castles in Ireland, I was told, well, not really sure, or they're owned by somebody in England someplace, some lord, or a cousin of the Queen owns like Lismore Castle, which is the most amazing building. It's gorgeous, and you can't even go in there, like, do you know? And it's like, what? I said, see, I couldn't figure this out as a child, because I was kind of going, well, we're supposed to be a republic, we're called a republic, but yes, I hadn't been in the law, of course, at this stage, but yeah, it doesn't compute in my head. It doesn't make any sense, because I don't see much, prosperity in this country. And if we've been a republic since, the 1922, then how come that there really only started to be some sort of prosperity in the country, was it the late 60s, when things started to turn around through industry? I couldn't work it out. So only as an adult, and I started to research this stuff, I realised, and only in the last couple of years, Robin, I realised that the Anglo-Irish Agreement was a gun to the head, really.
Yeah. Oh, absolutely. Yeah. I mean, there was all-out war threatened if we didn't accept what we were given, So I mean, you can't take from the achievement of the people at the time because they had nothing and they gained something,
Absolutely.
But when when we started turning on ourselves, we kind of lost the sight of the bigger picture,
Yeah, I see, and as well, the thing about empire as well, Robin, is that they were masters at chess, battle chess. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
And every country that the British Empire went into, that they created this divide before they pulled out. That they split India into Pakistan and India. That's the Eurasian continent there, right? And they did it all over Africa and all of the countries. They're not just the British, by the way. The Belgians did it as well. And they did it in all of the colonies that they had. They used to measure the noses of the locals and the colour of their skin, and they would decide. And a lot of the time, they'd actually allow the minority to be the ones who held the power when they pulled out.
Absolutely. I mean, a fine example of that would be Rwanda and Burundi.
Yes.
Where the Belgians decided that the Tutsis were a superior race to the Hutus, and they were given, they were given more power and so on. And that actually continued then when the UN got involved, because a lot of UN programs were based on entrepreneurship and so on, which anyway, I won't get too into that, but yeah, it's another example of what you're talking about. Divide and conquer.
Well, it's important, Robin, to understand this, right? Because from what I can see, that a lot of the world is still very fractured because of colonialism. The economic structures are still in place, the political structures are still in place, the civil structures are still in place, the law is still in place all over the world. And the bar, as some people say, is the British Accreditation Registry, is nearly in every modernised country in the world to this day. So we can't ignore it. We have to see it for what it is. We have to look at the past. We have to be the keepers of the knowledge of the past, right? Understand it. Understand. Okay, that is the past. We can't change it, but we have to acknowledge it. Look at where the mistakes were made. Look at the suffering that was there. Look at the achievements that we made, right? And now look at where we are in the present. What have we got left from that's still causing the same problems?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, I agree with you.
So, and that's where we are. Where we have to acknowledge everything and accept everything for as it is, and go, well, what can we do now? What can we change? And I'm a strong believer of, that so many minds come together with the right ideas. And let's not try and come together and be in conflict over ego stuff. Like, well, my idea is better than your idea.
Yeah, no, I totally agree with you. What the country does need is certain number of people to come together, agree on objectives, and just start working towards them, and take all the kind of party political nonsense out of it.
Yeah. And that can only be done by, acknowledging what's there and looking at an alternative. An alternative that makes sense for the majority of people. Will have to kind of go, ooh, that makes sense. I can see how that works. And let's give that a try and see how we get on.
Yeah, exactly, yeah. And it's no easy thing to do, because a lot of people are kind of sedated with the problems of their own lives and the kind of escapes of their own lives, you know.
Yeah, the TV.
I used to joke that the only way to get people interested in sort of our oil and gas and so on, and the crimes that have been perpetrated on us by the ECB would be to kind of weave all those issues into the script of EastEnders or Fair City, you know.
Yeah.
And it's a very cynical way of looking at it, but I don't mean to be cynical in that sense. I do understand that a lot of people are very shell-shocked about the things that have happened. They feel powerless, and they just go looking after their own lives and kind of try not to think about the bigger issues. But it's really only when a critical mass of people do start looking at the bigger issues that things can actually start to change.
Yeah, sure. I absolutely agree with you on that, you know. There was something else I was going to ask you. I just got a bit of a blank there for the moment. Yeah, it's in relation to the current system, right, and the process that are in place. The party political system. And the problem with that monster is that it's generational as well, isn't it? And there's like a whole block of farmers out there that will vote either Fianna Fáil or Fine Gael. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
And there's industrialists who will vote one or the other as well. And a big swat of the middle class will vote one or the other too, right? Now they're still stuck in that paradigm in their heads, and the biggest challenge that we have is how do we stop them, going back to the same old chestnut, and voting again. And if there's another election that's called next year or the year after, or whatever, if that government collapses, which it's not looking like it's going to the moment, they seem to be pretty much working together. How do we get them to stop, and go and vote for the same rubbish again the next time? That is the biggest challenge we have.
I know. You see, it's a very tricky one. The way I looked at it at the time of the election, and a lot of people I've met since then, activists, they nearly look down on you for having stood in an election.
Sure.
Because the whole system is so bankrupt.
You betrayed the cause.
Yeah. But at the time, the way I was looking at it was, people have a vote, and if they don't have an alternative to Fianna Fáil, Fine Gael, blah blah blah, then what are they? Then Fianna Fáil, Fine Gael are guaranteed to get in. That you have to provide them with some sort of alternative.
Yeah.
And that it would only be, again, to use the expression critical mass, that a critical mass of people who do want to see a change in the system get elected, then you can start seeing change. Now, that's only one way of doing it, but it is one way of doing it. I'm not tied to the idea of change coming about through enough independents or whatever getting elected, but it is one way, and it's not one that activists should necessarily turn their noses at up all the time,
Yeah.
Now, I do think that there's going to have to be more of a grassroots change in the country, of people demanding more. But while there are elections until then, activists should consider, getting involved in those and maybe trying to change things from the inside. It's not an ideal way of change. Very sorry about that.
You're okay.
New phone.
I think you're right. What needs to be done, right, is that you need to have a group of people that are willing to dilute the current system. Like Ben Gilroy is doing that with the DDI, Direct Democracy, and CPPC in Cork as well, right? You need to have those people to help dilute the current system, and people also need to stand up and with a grassroots movement as well, and start doing stuff locally at their own level. Start setting up co-ops locally, self-sustainable groups, looking at bioenergy, alternative energies, alternative currencies. All these things need to be looked at.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, they certainly do.
You know, and that can only happen, I think, if you get some groups in the country starting to do that and put energy into something, and let's see what happens next. And then you can bring people to, say, pick a town, and let's do that town, like Clonakilty or something like that, right? And go, look, we're starting up these initiatives in Clonakilty. It's actually working. Why don't you come along and have a look and see if you can start something in your own town or village?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
You know?
Yeah. No. Yeah, I fully agree with you there.
And see what comes out of it, because really I don't think there's anything else that people can do, because the system is so endemic, it's so corrupted, it's so the tentacles are so deep in every aspect of society, that the only way that you can bring about lasting change is if it's all about consciousness at the end of the day, Robin, isn't it? It's about people, it's how they see the world. That needs to change.
Yeah. Another point I think should be made is that the people who wrote our constitution, who set up our constitution, there were a lot of very insightful and far-thinking measures put in our constitution, and while there's a lot of talk about people wanting to update our constitution, I think a lot of the principles in it aren't being used enough, and I would like to see more constitutional challenges to some of the more grotesque things the government have done in recent years.
Yeah.
And I think we would get quite a bit of progress on that. And if we could prove that Fianna Fáil, for example, committed treason, they handed away the sovereignty of the country, and if more cases like that were taken, and then Fianna Fáil or Fine Gael in Labour, if it could be shown in a constitutional way that they, for example, told so many lies at election time compared to what their subsequent behaviour has shown, that that they have also gone against the constitution to such an extent that they've committed treason. The IMF's programme for government, for example, is the handing away of our sovereignty piecemeal, and they've signed up to that. I'd like to see our political parties being held more accountable under the Constitution for what they've done, because one way of changing the system would be to have the corrupt parties in power so utterly discredited, and have it done in a legal way.
Yeah.
That it would nearly bring about a changed system by default, nearly, if you know what I mean.
I'm with you on that. I think that's a great idea, Robin. Now, the only problem I will say in relation to that is I've actually been in the High Court in Dublin, right? And I've witnessed the guy in the Geneva, which is the black cloak that they wear, and the funny hair, right? The wig, right? With the most upper class English accent you'd ever hear in this country. Right? Yeah. I didn't know who. I thought he'd just flown in on a private jet to hear this particular case, right? From the Crown in the centre of London, someplace, right?
Yeah.
And I heard this judge say, when the Constitution was mentioned, that we do not recognise the Constitution in this court.
Oh, really?
Oh, really? Oh, really?
God.
Now, let me explain how that actually happens, because the court system in this country, and everyone in it, they all swear allegiance to the Crown, which is the 1 mile square in the city of London, right? Which is the Bar Association and all that sort of crack. They're all tied into the same vehicle, yeah? So they're commercial courts, and you mentioned earlier about maritime law, right? That they are all linked to the one idea and the one concept, and their allegiance all flows back up to the crown. Now, they never actually admit that, but that's in reality what's happening. Yeah, and when they're so in your face and so arrogant, and they actually will say in on Irish land, right? Yeah. In the forecourts, right, with all the history behind it, with that was bombed and everything, through the War of Independence. That, you know, it's like, what the hell? You know what I mean?
Yeah.
I actually was. It's like someone punched me in the stomach, because I didn't understand that at the time, right? And there's a particular case which I won't go into, but I told Vinnie Byrne this of TNS, and he was like, "Oh, really?" I went, "Yes, really." Yeah. Now, the commercial courts, so what we need to do is we need to establish sovereign courts again. And that's a problem, because there isn't any except for one of the barracks, army barracks in Dublin. So if you go into one of these courts, and it's been tried many times, right? Yeah. If you go into one of these courts, they will just ignore you. And it's happening all the time. You can go in with the Constitution in your hand, and they will go, whatever, blah, 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 that's irrelevant, and moving on to this, or, you know, and they just bypass it. Now, what I've been told, which is very effective, what you can do, if they're actually acting unlawfully, which they are against the Irish people, because the Constitution's for the people, it's not for the Crown, right? If they're acting unlawfully, what you can do is put commercial liens on the judges, on politicians, on the corporatocracy, and you can do it totally lawfully, and it's coming from a sovereign point of view, from the sovereign people. If it's proven that they're acting unlawfully, you can go put a commercial lien on their own home, their own car, their own business, and that is really locks in. And this has been done very successfully in the UK. I can't remember the name of the guy that's doing it, but it's a conversation I had earlier today, and that's basically, I think that's the only way to go. There isn't any other way to go in respect to that. And then when they go to try and get credit to buy a new fleet, that they can't do it, it'll change things, and they'll start to acquiesce.
Yeah.
You know.
Yeah. That's an interesting way of going about it. Something you said there about the allegiance of these sort of higher lawyers and so on. Something that would be that I'd really love to do sometime, and if you were able to get one on your show, it would be brilliant. Yeah. Just I think your listeners would really enjoy it. What I was told before is that once you get to senior counsel, that's the point where you're told how the world actually works. Right. Who's in charge, where your allegiance is, who you serve, etc., etc. Whoa. And junior counsels are acting in good faith. They're basically generally just the law says this, so that's what we're trying to impose here. Yeah. It's only when you get a senior counsel, when you get to senior counsel and you get your silk or something. I'm not quite sure what the expression is. Yeah. But that's when you're told, no, everything you know up to this point is wrong. Mm-hmm. Here's how the world works, and so on. I think if your show could get a rogue senior counsel to explain just how all that works, it'd be a very, very interesting show. Hey, come here, I'd love to do it. It's just a matter of finding one. Come here. The TNS Radio has been trying to find a rogue senior counsel for many years now, and they haven't managed to do it yet. But I'll tell you one thing. If you could help us organise that, or anyone you know, I mean, absolutely. Yeah, well, listen, I'll stick on my Gumtree account. Rogue senior counsel wanted. But that is you're going to have to see a little bit of a shift away, and so going to have to come down to morality and conscience, because at the end of the day, we can't have a new functioning system unless we bring along a lot of these people too that are pretty much locked into the current system. Because it's a hierarchical structure, it's a pyramidal structure, as we know, and that if you step out that, you'll be socially ostracized. And how I explained it to somebody the other day was that if you can imagine that you live in D4 and that you play golf every Sunday with a judge and top solicitors and barristers and the local leader in the industry, you know, that if you start to step outside or give interviews or do whatever, that all of a sudden your golf buddies cancel the next tea time. You won't be invited to the next whatever champagne dinner event
fashion event, you know that you would be ostracized, and it's quite difficult. So we have to understand a lot of these people, they're locked into that system, and we're going to have to tease them out gently, Robin.
Exactly. Yeah. You see, and funny to say that. I was having a very interesting talk with somebody recently. She's an economics professor, and we were talking about the Irish media bias towards the status quo, and that our political parties aren't being torn to shreds as you'd expect, and so on. And I was asking, to what extent does the state influence the press? And she was saying, I'd love to think that the state has a huge influence over them. They do have an influence in RTE, of course, because they appoint the director general of the station.
And they fund it.
Yeah, and will we fund it for them?
Yeah.
But she was saying that in terms of the newspapers and so on, there'd be an editorial bias, obviously, but the main problem is that you've got people from a certain background tend to gravitate towards journalism, and that they aren't consciously, giving out about dole scroungers or whatever, but it's just that people from their background tend not to be on the dole and don't quite get it.
Sure, it makes sense. It's a class distinction.
So, exactly, yeah.
Yeah.
And a lot of them wouldn't even consider themselves as being of a certain class.
Yeah.
And maybe they aren't from a certain class, but maybe through going to, just through basically social connections they have, or going to college or whatever, they hang around with people from a certain background or whatever, and they get common views about things, and they're quite self-sufficient and don't understand how other people aren't. And basically the point that she was making is that it's wrong to look at the system as it is as being a conspiracy. It's very often that people within the system just are used to the system and they think it's how things should be.
Sure, they're living in their own bubble.
Sorry?
They're living in their own little bubble.
Yeah, exactly, yeah. And so, journalists who, and I'm using this just one example of, some of the more right-wing journalists who are giving out about social welfare and so on. They're not part of some neoliberal conspiracy that wants to see state spending cut. They're just from a background whereby they don't understand why people are on social welfare. Didn't they get an education? Didn't the state pay for the education? Blah blah blah. So that's one of the problems that you have. It's that a lot of people who support the system aren't doing it necessarily for any bad reasons. They just haven't stood back and looked at what alternatives there could be.
Okay, that's good. Yeah, I understand where you're coming from with that, man. I really do.
Yeah, saying,
Well, I'm delighted to be having this conversation with you, Robin, because you actually think very, very similar to me. Because I've read an awful lot of books on human behavior and psychology.
Yeah,
and that everyone has their own version of reality, and it's different to everybody else, right? So if you're born into wealth, or you're born into a certain level of education, or you're born into a political family, or you're born into an industrial family, or a monarchy, or whatever, that's all you know.
Exactly. Yeah.
That's it. You can't think outside the box. It's impossible.
Yeah.
Because
go on. Nobody wants to see themselves as the bad guy.
No, they don't.
Ever,
No, they don't. Even if you put yourself in the shoes of the world's elite, the Henry Kissingers of this world, the Rothschild families of this world, the monarchy, right? The European monarchy, the people who pull all the strings behind the scenes, yeah? They were born into that. Now, can they step down and just be a truck driver?
Yeah, exactly.
They can't, right? So, not knocking any truck drivers out there, of course. But, what I'm saying is that they were born into that world. They were educated in a particular way. They were groomed in a certain way. They go to boarding schools. A lot of these people, the elites, they go to boarding schools, which they're actually taken away from their parents at a very vulnerable age. You know, going through the
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
you're going from the child's mind into an adult mind, and those years are very important. I don't think anyone should be taken away from their parents for those formative years. I think it's a disastrous thing for somebody, and you're totally conditioned then to behave and act in a certain way.
Yeah, that's true.
And you're taught in an elitist way, and something that's come up a lot lately, and I've done interviews with other people about this as well. It's very interesting, is that the boarding schools, they teach you how to be a leader, they teach you how to debate, right, and teach you how to be competitive. So you see the likes of the John Kerry and these guys in America, and they're good. They stand up in front of the podium and debate, with George Bush or whoever, and they're well able to do it. They've got great confidence and charisma, and we all know that it's all just bullshit at the end of the day. But they have these skills, and they've been groomed in a certain way to be able to deliver information in a certain way to make themselves endearing to the population, where the rest of us are all farmed into public schools, and all you're taught is how to sit down, shut up, and take down these notes from the board, please.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
You know. So you have great divisions then amongst all the different people, and they all then become the different realities in the human consciousness, whether you're driving the truck or whether you are working in government in some office, whether you're at higher level stuff, whether you're an executive in a bank or whatever you may be. All you know is what came before, your own version of reality, your education, your grooming, and then whatever work experience that you have, and whoever you socialise with.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
So it's a big challenge, but we're up for it.
Absolutely.
Can I ask you about before we finish up? We're actually been talking for an hour and 15 minutes, believe it or not. You wouldn't think it.
Yeah.
Can I ask you about the Occupy movement? What was your experience of that? What's your thoughts on that?
Yeah, well, when Occupy Wall Street started, well, of course, it started off first of all in Spain with the Indignados. Where people started coming out in the plazas and the squares in Spanish towns and cities, and coming out and demanding change. And they were non-party political, and they wouldn't allow political banners because they saw correctly that political banners tend to be divisive, because if you're not, you may agree with the issue, but if it seems to be run by a political crowd that you don't agree with, then you'll tend to stay away.
Yeah.
So that kind of moved over to Wall Street, and it was a very exciting time. We're talking around the end of September, start of October last year. It was a very exciting time because nobody knew what was going to come from this. And I remember I was chatting away on Facebook to a guy I know. He's been big into activism for years, and I said, there really should be something like that in Dublin. And he started laughing and said, "Yeah, well, I'm actually on a committee for it. We're setting one up next week. Do you want to join?" And I said, "Yeah, sure. So sign me up." And so we just arrived up one Saturday outside the central bank, stood up and spoke. All of us just kind of took it in turns to stand up and speak. We brought tents, and it was actually quite amusing because we weren't sure. There were a couple of guards standing there, and we weren't sure would they let us put up the tents. So a couple of lads got behind a crowd of people and set up a tent, and then that was like our first success. And,
sneaky.
And then and then we thought, well, this is a bit ridiculous. So a couple of other lads went up and said to the guards, "Listen, now we're going to set up tents here. Is that okay?" They said, "Yeah, once you're not causing a disturbance, the guards are fine about it." And then. So we stayed that weekend, and then on the Monday morning there were rumours that the guards were going to get rid of us before the central bank opened.
Yeah.
So at all costs we wanted to stay there until start of business on Monday morning, and it turned out the rumours had been false. The guards didn't get rid of us, and that was our next big victory.
Yeah. Do you think you had much support within the Gardaí overall?
Yeah, certainly from speaking to some of them.
The lower ranks, I'm guessing you would have had anyway.
Yeah, but the way one of the sergeants put it to us, he would have been the main guy we were in touch with. He said, "Lads, we've no problem with what you're doing, and fair play to you for trying to take a stand about these issues. No one can really fault the issues that you're on about. But at the end of the day, if we ask you to move, it'll be the orders of fellas on a lot more money than we are.
Is that what he said to you?
That's what he said to us.
Well, that's honesty, isn't it?
That's honesty, and it's fair enough. We weren't expecting we wouldn't have expected the guards to get sacked by refusing to move us on if it came to that. But
yeah.
But it didn't really arise. We were there for months and months.
Yeah.
So it was a great way of getting people together. I have to say there was a real sense of euphoria among the people who, certainly in the first few weeks.
Yeah.
That among those who got together, because we were kind of sharing ideas and felt like we were doing something positive, and it was the first kind of visible resistance there had been to what the government and the Troika had been doing to the country.
Sure.
There was very visible resistance in Greece and Spain and other countries. There was nothing to be seen in Ireland.
No.
And it was the first kind of permanent resistance of any sort.
Mm.
And then within a few weeks, within a couple of weeks, when we saw them springing up in Waterford and Cork and Galway and so on, Belfast, they even started in Donegal, Limerick. The feeling of elation we got seeing them spring up around the country, it was just brilliant.
I'd say so, yeah.
Yeah. Now we did get huge support from the public, and I think the issues that we pointed out, the issues that we raised, were ones that everyone agreed with. So it did become a focal point for a lot of activists and just members of the general public who had concerns or ideas or something would come down and get a bit more educated about what the issues were and so on.
Yeah, it's funny you say that, Robin, because I was part of I was one of the original people there at the Occupy Waterford camp, and our demands were the same as yours. and that wasn't an accident. We didn't actually discuss them with anybody. This many other camps, it just happened to be ended up being the same things.
I have to say in Dublin we were delighted to see that, because we didn't want in any way to be influencing the other ones, and we didn't. You all set up by yourselves, and came up with your own principles that you wanted to see change, and so issues that you wanted to see addressed, and so on.
Yeah.
I think that really made the movement stronger by all the occupies kind of being themselves for the people in those towns, as opposed to just copying one another.
Okay. So looking back and reflecting on the Occupy, what do you think that we got out of it as a people?
Well, let me see. If you could just hold on one moment, please.
Yeah, no problem.
What did the Irish people get out of Occupy? Well, there were a lot of people who didn't get anything out of it, for the simple reason that they didn't have an interest in it, and a lot of people just we're not a nation that complains politically in any real way, and so a lot of people just didn't have an interest in it. Anyone that did have an interest in it, I think, firstly, they became a lot more informed about some of the things that were wrong in the country and that need to be addressed. I think a strength of what came out of Occupy was the way it addressed issues that affect everybody, and is, to some extent, put them onto the political agenda, in the sense that these issues became issues now that thousands of people were aware of and will always be aware of.
Yeah.
So the likes of our oil and gas being handed away, and the oil and gas potential that the country has, that is now in the consciousness of many, many thousands and thousands of people when it hadn't really been before, because unless people were kind of clued into what the activists in Shell to Sea had been saying, they mightn't just have been aware of the extent of the oil and gas giveaway. That's one example, and that's the same with all the issues that were raised. A lot of people became a lot more informed, and so on. Another benefit that we got out of it was that it got together a lot of people who are may not have been activists before, but are very interested in seeing change in the country. It got all these people together, and those people are still involved in networks and groups and doing their bit to see change when they hadn't been involved before. And of the ones who had been involved before, they've now got closer links to fellow activists and activists on different issues and so on.
Yeah.
And this is going into the future. This is something that's going to be a big help to a lot of different movements. And we've already seen it with the household charge campaign. That's the biggest resistance campaign we have at the moment. And a lot of people who have been involved in Occupy, or even just supported Occupy, have used this issue as one that they want to start pushing forward. And it's a movement that's a lot more innovative and widely spread than many of the other similar types of things from a few years back that have been set up.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, well, I have to agree with all of that. You know, it's I've made amazing contacts since the Occupy Waterford camp went up there in December last year. It actually was the end of November. It was the 11th of November. 11/11. Yeah, it was 11/11. That was the day we started it, man. Amazingly, it was 3 months. We were there for 3 months: November, December, and January.
Yeah.
How long were you there for yourselves in Dame Street?
I think we started on the 7th or 11th, I'm not sure, of October. Yeah,
you were there a good bit before us, I remember that, yeah. Because I remember that we were concerned about starting it up because of we knew we had a very cold winter the previous year. And
yeah. And it turned out to be a pussycat of a winter.
Yeah, it wasn't that bad, actually, yeah. We had a few storms, though, but it wasn't actually that bad. So Robin, where are you now? What are you at now yourself? I know you're still involved in not direct politics, but you're still involved with activism and still involved with trying to get information out there with people. So just give us before we finish up. Tell us what are you at?
Well, I'm I do a fair bit of writing, mostly on the internet, the odd letter to the paper and so on. I'm involved in the Dundalk campaign against the household charge, the water household charge and so on.
Mm-hmm.
And they'd be my main activities at the moment.
Mm-hmm.
I was hoping to bring a legal challenge. I'd actually started the process to the ESM treaty, but thankfully Mr. Pringle from Donegal,
he's already done that.
He got in there before me, and I think I'm watching this very intensely at the moment. It just started in the higher Supreme Court. I'm not sure. It started yesterday, and basically the recent referendum we had, where maybe it's a bit unfair, but I say where the turkeys voted for Christmas,
mm-hmm.
but that referendum could be scrapped as null and void if the Supreme Court goes along with some of the arguments Pringle is making.
And how's he getting on?
Well, they just heard. I think yesterday was the opening salvo from the Pringle side. They were just laying out their case basically. It's expected to last maybe 4 days or so.
Mm-hmm.
So we could know towards the end of the week how it's going. And one of the main points of this case is that there's an Article 136, it's called, which the EU wants to insert into a previous treaty, to allow for the setting up of the ESM. That requires a referendum. Legally, that should require a referendum to change a treaty that we have already voted on. But of course, we're not being offered a referendum on it. One of the things in this Pringle case is that we should demand a referendum, and if the court agrees with that, then the whole ESM process grinds across Europe, grinds to a halt, and it's our referendum on it which will allow it to go ahead. And if that happens, we have the leverage that we have needed for so long since this banking nonsense all started, because we would be calling the shots. And I don't really like the way referenda have been used in previous years to kind of wrangle concessions and extra money or whatever. But in this particular case, if we can grab the EU by the short and curlies, then we should grab on as tight as we can. Yeah. So I'm following intensely at the moment this Pringle case, and hopefully we'll get a good result from it.
Well, you always have to be optimistic. I think you can't just drop the baton at this stage. We have to keep passing it,
exactly.
We got to keep the heads up and keep plugging away. And I think a lot of people are very disappointed with the vote. I have my doubts whether that was a legitimate vote. I don't know if you saw that one of the news agencies actually gave the results many hours before the result was announced in England, which is quite shocking. It wouldn't surprise me if the vote was tampered with at all. It really wouldn't,
Yeah, I'd put nothing past them,
Yeah. So listen, Robin, it's been fantastic talking to you. It's been a brilliant interview, and we've covered a lot of topics. I don't know if you're expecting to cover so much, but
no, I'm just looking at the thing there. We're on maybe an hour and 40 minutes or so.
An hour and 30.
I have to say, I flew by. I really enjoyed chatting to you.
It's great. An hour and 33 minutes. So I'm going to wrap it up, man. And look, wish you all the best in the future and all the work that you will be doing, and I'm sure you're going to be even more busy before the year is out and involved in a lot more worthwhile projects. And we'll get you on the show again when you have any more updates to let us know what's happening in your world.
Thanks very much, James. I appreciate it. And hopefully we catch up again soon.
Thanks very much. So that brings us to the end of show 9 of Awaken Ireland Radio. I hope you enjoyed the show. I certainly did enjoy delivering all of the information throughout the last couple of hours. Again, if you'd like to contact the show, you can contact us at awakenirelandradio@gmail.com. We also have a Facebook page. It's facebook.com/Awaken Ireland Radio. And we'll have another show for you next week between 12 a.m. to 3 a.m. on Sunday. And we talk to you then. Good night.